a lot of request methods that can be sent over to a web server. And the four most popular ones you see here are the post, get, put, and delete. And these are also known as the CRUD for create, read, update, and delete, also very common in database systems. So a Node.js request method, one of these, is usually made or created with the HTTP request or the HTTP get method, and we'll see how that's done in a minute. And then when a request method is received on the server side, it's usually passed to this request object, as you see in the code below. Then through this request object, you can check the method property to check what type of request was sent over. And based on that method type, you can then process the data or process whatever you need to process in the backend accordingly. So let's go and see how this is done in Node. All right, so back in here in the demo folder, I'm going to go into the app.js folder, and I'm going to modify this code a little bit. I'm going to remove the constant, the to server here we did earlier, so I don't need that anymore. And we'll just use the first one, and with that we'll be responding to some type of request that will be sent over from another server. So let's change this a little bit here. I'm going to go ahead and so let's see. I'm going to go and modify this request response. That's good, and I'm going to leave this as is. But when the response here, I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to check to see what type of request that it was sent over through the other server. So you can do something like if the request dot method is equal to a get. If that's the case, then let's just say that I'm going to just write over send that over to the other side. I'm going to go and copy this and drag that over and put it right in here. Okay, and I just put here, put a get, so we know what that is. Okay, and I'm going to copy this 3 lines 5 through 7 and just duplicate that three times. All right, so this is a get. This would be a post. I'll put a post here. The post here, I'm going to write it means I'm going to resend it back to whoever make the request, right? So usually you put a web page or some document or a video or image or whatever. But I'm just an example to show you how it works. And then we have the put, and then here is the delete. We'll put it here, and then we'll clean up down here a little bit. Okay, so let's save this, and I think that's all I need for this server to respond to this type of request. I'm going to go and create another file over here, and this time I'm going to call it maybe requests. Okay, and on this side of this server, we'll do something kind of similar to the other one, except now we're going to send a request to the other server to process some data. Right, so we still need that HTTP library to make the request. And I'm not going to create a server though, because I'm just going to use it to send the request over. Okay, so I'm going to go and then create a JSON string, because when you send a request, I'm going to just say you pass some data to the header of the request and send it over to the other side. And in the header, you're able to specify what type of method or what method of request you're sending over. Okay, so I'm going to do here something like constant, call it data, just some data I want to pass over, and we'll stringify it. It needs to be in a string format, right? Otherwise you cannot pass data across server. This is a really simple one. Maybe like title of a video or something. Let's call it maybe, the mean stack. Just something like that. Okay, very simple one. And then I'm going to also create an options. And the reason why I do option is because maybe before I do that, I'm going to do the request first. So let's just say constant request is going to be the HTTP. That is the HTTP up here. This one has a function called request. Okay, you can use the request, we can use the get. Either function should be fine. And so I'll use the request in this case, but either one should be fine. This is just a slight difference. Using the get is that you don't have to use the end function to end your request. So that is usually that's safer, but this is always this pro and con between the two. But with the request, you just make sure you close the process when you are done. Otherwise, you have an error. So in the request function, you can then send the options. What options are? Options would be like the URL, where you sending the request to, what type of request are you sending over, and several other things like the port number you're sending over to, the header content, and things like that. Okay, so I'm gonna put here, just put an options here for now, and we'll go up and we'll create that list. So the options, and then also take a response object. That is again not an anonymous function, a callback function that will be passed into the function inside here. Then we'll, once we receive the request, the response coming back from this app server, I'm going to send over to this server here to port 3000. And when that comes in, then I'm going to receive one of these data back, either a get, a post, put, or a delete message comes back to the request through this response object. And it comes in the form of a data. Okay, so then here I'm going to say the response dot on the type of data. When the data comes back, again, it takes another callback function, and the callback function usually is called chunk of data. So then when a chunk of data is received, I'm just going to print that up to the console. And you can use the console log, or you can use the process object. A process is the actual process object that runs your Node application, and it's available globally, so you can use it anywhere in your code. And this is useful for when you read data from the console and output data back to the console. So for the standard input and standard output. So for the stdout, I'm going to write the chunk. Okay. So in other words, when I run this, I'm going to see the word delete, post, put, or update in the console. Okay. And then once I'm done with that, so I also want to make sure if there is not, if there's any error. So you can put on error here. You can just do another code on here that says on if it's an error, if I have any error at all, then you want to process that error as well. So the type of error, again, go to another function here. Now I can just do a console log, console error, and it will put the error to the console. Okay. And then finally, like I mentioned, because I'm calling a request, I must end the request down here. So request has to be ended. If you don't call the request end, it's going to have an error. Okay. If you're using the get, then you can completely omit this line. So that's why I said you can use one or the other. Okay, so now I got this is done. I just need to go back and provide the options. What are the options? Well, options is going to be an object, right? So I'm going to here say constant. The options are going to be an object of several things. One of these is the host name. A couple of them, but one of the properties you need are the host name, and the host name just be the local host, right? We're using local host. It could be an IP address or a domain name. If it's a remote site, you can put that here, like google.com or whatever it is that you're sending the request to. So this case is in the same local host here. And a port number, I'm using port 3000. Okay. And then the path is like to a very specific endpoint. So I put a backslash, that is the root directory. And then the method of request here is where you put those type, either a get, a put, put a comment here, put, delete, or post, right? Or several others. So you put that here. And then you will also put the headers. And the header is going to be, again, an object of the content type. What type of content are you passing over to this server? I'll just say application, maybe you passed in JSON data format, because what I have up here is actually a JSON data. It's going to be a JSON string. Okay. And then you also want to maybe just specify what size of your content. And this would be the data up there, dot length. And that should give you the length of this size. It'll be just basically how many ever there are characters, and it pass that to the header. And then all this will be passed to the function request, and then all this information here plus any data in the body, which I did not add here. You could add data in the body, which you not sure why you want to do that, but you do that when you put a post or a put, right? You add data to it. But so when this comes over to the other side, then it should process this data and then send it back to the response, receive that data. If there's any data, then there's no any error. We go ahead and process the chunk of data right to the console, and then we are done for every request. Okay, so let's go ahead and see if this works. Let's save both files, go to the terminal, and then just make sure we are in the demo. Okay, so first we want to run the app server first. So I'm going to go and type in no app. So that's running. And then as you can see, we're not actually going to the browser. We're just doing locally in the server here because it's not affecting the browser at all. So if I go to the browser, yeah, I'm going to see something too because I'd sent a request to the app here. So if I go to the browser just to see what that looks like, anyway, let me go ahead and load the browser. It's going to be localhost, not 4,000, but 3,000. Okay, you see that I get the word get because that was sent over to the back to where I made the request. And because in the browser, it's always going to be get. So I can't make post or put or things like that unless I use a different tool like Postman or something. Okay, so that's working for sure. But back in here, we want to make the request through this file called request.js. Okay, so I'm going to add another terminal here, and then I'll go back to the demo folder and I'll run the request file from here, node and then request.js. So I'm going to go ahead and split the screen. Actually, I should do this, split the screen. And so you can see both. What's going on? Let me delete this. And I'll delete this too. Okay, I'm going to split the screen here. Okay, so the second screen and then the first screen. Let me turn this off so we can have some space up here. All right, so on the right side, I'm going to go into the demo folder, and then I'm going to run the request. Okay, so when I run it, you see that I got back a get, right? Nothing happens on here because we didn't output anything here, but the get is sent back, and that get is this get here because I sent a get request. Now if I change my code to a type of, let's say, post, okay, let me save this file, the request file, go down here to request and run it again, I should get a post back. Okay, so you get a post back because it returns to whoever made the request. So this is how a server responds to a particular request. Any one of these types can be accessed, can be processed, and so this is how you actually create REST APIs and to perform CRUD operations. So now in the next video, we'll explore how routing works in Node.js and further to respond to these type of requests.